We can now go across to France 24's Daniel Hawkins standing by in Moscow. Good afternoon to you, Daniel. Russia says the truce has gone into effect. Ukraine says it's not going to respect it, yet both sides seem to be accusing the other of violations.
Yeah, I think when this truce was announced, this came as a surprise to many people, but I don't think the fact it's clearly failing is a surprise to many because, of course, as soon as it was announced, it was rejected by both Kyiv and its Western allies. Over the last just over 4.5 hours now since this truce came into effect from the Russian side, we've seen to and fro accusations of shelling. The Russian Defense Ministry has said Russian positions have come under attack in Luhansk, Donetsk and Zaporizhzhia regions, but its troops were observing the ceasefire. The Joint Center for Control and Coordination, which is a monitoring group that monitors the conflict in the Donbass, has also confirmed that Kyiv fired around 6 rounds into the Petrovsky district of Donetsk, though no casualties were reported there. And the Russian side have said these attacks came just minutes after the truce was announced. Kyiv, of course, is saying the Russians are doing the same thing. They've said that the second largest city in the east, Kramatorsk, came under fire. They've also said that Russian forces had attacked the city of Kherson, which left multiple people dead or injured. Of course, there's no way to immediately independently verify these claims, but certainly there's been a lot of to and fro back and forth over the last 4 hours. The Russian side, of course, initially said that if they did come under attack, if they did come under shelling, they would respond. And that's what they claim they've been doing, neutralizing the Ukrainian positions they say have been firing on them. For the Ukrainian side, of course, none of this mattered to start with because they rejected this proposal as soon as it was put forward. They said it would be business as usual. On the ground militarily, they would continue to attack Russian positions and push them out of the Donbass and other areas.
And Daniel, what is Vladimir Putin's strategy here? Because the Ukrainians seem to think he has something up his sleeve, and so do the Americans, it seems.
I think from the very start, this was less about a strategy than a symbolic message. I think this attempt at a truce from Moscow comes at a time, obviously, when the US and Germany have agreed sending on armored vehicles to Ukraine. That follows the sending of the decision, rather, to send Patriot missiles and could precede the sending of tanks at some point in the future. So Putin really wanted to contrast this offer with what the Kremlin's been saying all along, this militarization of Ukraine, this flooding of weapons by the West into Ukraine. I think it was also a message to show that Kyiv, or rather Russia, Moscow, not only talks peace, but is willing to take some steps to implement it practically. I think from the very start, though, perhaps it was obvious that Kyiv was being set up to fail, because from the very onset of this message from Patriarch Kirill, the Ukrainian officials have said, look, we're not going to observe this. So I think the Russians probably knew that from the very start. It's not been bought either by Kyiv's allies, Germany and the US, dismissing it with a lot of skepticism, though probably not as strongly worded as Ukrainian officials. And of course, this also fits very nicely with Russia's side of the story about repressions and a crackdown on the Russian Orthodox Church in Ukraine. This absolutely backs that up, that Kyiv isn't respecting Christian traditions, isn't respecting rather a truce at a holy time for Orthodox Christians around the world. It's unlikely, I think, we're going to see any sort of change in strategy, anything, as you said, up Putin's sleeve, because a 36-hour truce would be quite unlikely to change anything on the battlefield anyway. And even if the truce were observed on both sides and Russia tried to improve their military positions somehow during that time, I think that would be quite obvious through various intelligence and satellite imagery. So overall, I think this was about symbolism, about sending a message, and really about sending a message to the world. And of course, a lot of people will be disappointed. This truce has failed, but it was quite obvious from the start, and it was highly unlikely to hold for more than a few minutes.